Life after death. Eyewitness accounts.
My near-death experience.
During the winter session of my junior year, 1973, at the University of Colorado, I was enrolled in a tennis class. It was too cold to play outside on the courts, so we were bouncing balls off the walls of the indoor gym when I began to feel the pain of a migraine rapidly increasing. I was terrified, realizing that by the time the class was over, the pain would be uncontrollable. I was prescribed a medication that I carried with me and could use when the pain was too much. I only used it on rare occasions when I felt like I couldn't work at all. It put me to sleep for about 24 hours. I needed to go back to my dorm, but I felt like I couldn't wait. I took my medicine, assuming I would faint, and hoped someone would somehow get me home. For as long as I can remember, I have suffered from headaches. When I entered my teens, they got worse. I was even hospitalized for evaluation to rule out a brain tumor. I was scheduled for counseling after one doctor thought they were stress-related. I eventually began daily treatment with several prescribed medications. My migraines usually lasted for weeks at a time. I was terrified of the pain and was convinced that something was so terribly wrong with me that I would never live to be 20. I felt depressed when I had to celebrate my 20th birthday. I realized that I had to move on with my life, plan for life, look forward to the future, grow up. About 8 months after that milestone, while playing tennis, I used a medication I had saved for when the explosive pain was too much. I kept hitting the ball against the wall, feeling the medicine numb my body. The next memory I remember is walking back to my dorm. It was a 15 to 20 minute walk, but I only remember one moment. I was walking alone, up the hill past the campus bookstore. Then I remember being in my dorm room worrying about a paper that I realized was due soon. All I had to do was type up the title page and it would be done. I began to wonder if I had taken the medicine or if I was only thinking about taking it. I tried to remember, but couldn't. I decided that I must not have taken it because I was awake and feeling no pain. So I took another dose and then sat down at the typewriter to finish the article. It would only take a few minutes to type the title page. And I knew from past experience that the drug would take longer to take effect. A few moments later, I lost control of my body and fell forward onto the typewriter. I was still conscious and feeling the migraine, but I couldn't move or feel anything below my neck. I just lay there, helpless. I tried to call for help, but the cleaning lady was vacuuming the hallway outside my room and no one could hear my screams. As soon as the vacuum cleaner turned off, I screamed again, and a male student heard me. He cautiously entered my room and I asked him to help me to the bed. I told him I was paralyzed. He pulled me out of the typewriter and put me in a chair. But then he let go and I fell forward, crashing my face into the typewriter again. He was at a loss as to what to do and when to get help. When he came back, he had a friend. The two of them struggled to carry me a few feet to the bed. Once I was on the bed, they left, and I immediately fell asleep. As I slept, I realized that I didn't have any pain. I realized that I had never experienced physical discomfort in my life. It was such an all-consuming realization. I couldn't feel my migraine, or the bed under me, or my clothes on my body, or even my head on the pillow. It was such a relief. At the same time, peace, contentment, joy, happiness, and love overwhelmed me. It was all so incredibly beautiful. I can't adequately explain to others how wonderful it was. But I remember it clearly. Even though more than 20 years have passed since that day. Another transformation took place in my mind. I was completely awake and very interested in what was going on. But my mind was not at all like the mind I had always had. I fully understood what was happening. I knew I was dead. But I didn't feel even a hint of fear, uncertainty, or reluctance. As I was going through this, I was distracted by my roommate, Trina, who came into the room, looked at me, sleeping, on the bottom bunk, and then climbed into her top bunk. I was surprised at the way she shook the bed as she climbed up. But I felt no pain. I watched as she pulled out her Bible, opened it to Psalms, and began to read. As I looked over her shoulder to see what she was reading, I realized I was no longer in my body. I looked at myself lying on the bottom bunk, looked at Trina again, and thought, she doesn't even know I'm dead. The thought amused me. My attention left that room. And there was a period of time was no longer real, when I rested in a state of rest. Perhaps it was during this time that I acquired the knowledge I later recalled. But I have no memory of learning. I wasn't even aware of the sense of movement until I began to see glimpses of light in the distance and realized that I was in darkness, moving toward the light. When I think about it now, it reminds me of when I was a kid, exploring the long winding railroad tunnels in the hills above our boarding school in Kenya. Those tunnels were blacker than anything I had ever seen. I was frightened by the inability to see, the sounds and the knowledge that the tunnels were full of bats. I remember the feeling of relief when I first noticed a point of light in the distance. My fears faded as the light increased. This childhood memory is similar to the visual experience of moving toward the light. But the feelings and emotions were very different. I experienced a pleasure beyond anything my human mind could ever have imagined. As the light expanded and conquered the darkness, I entered the most beautiful place I had ever seen. A few years earlier I had seen the splendor of the Lake District in northern England and marveled at its beauty. But the place I came to after my death was far more beautiful. There were a series of hills and valleys with streams running through them. The grass was greener than any lawn in the richest neighborhood. It was a beautiful sunny day. And I was walking, just enjoying my surroundings. I was alone. But I was not aware of my loneliness. I didn't feel alone. But when I thought of those beautiful hills, I had no recollection of another person until I noticed a man standing just beyond the low stone wall. I understood so much. I had no limitations of the human mind. I knew that the man on the other side of the wall was going to take me to God. I knew that my experience was based on my needs. I saw a man I could trust. The other person saw what he needed to see. I had only vague ideas about the afterlife before in my human mind. But when I was there, I was in a place I knew. And the person was someone I had always known. I knew where I was going and what awaited me. And I felt happy. The man was dressed casually, jeans and a loose shirt. He was gentle, compassionate, and focused on me. I looked into his eyes and suddenly realized that it wasn't my time to die yet. I was stunned. I knew that if I just stepped over the wall I could move on, that I had a choice. But he and I both knew that I had to go back. Looking him in the face, I said, "This is not my time." And he replied, "No, it's not." Although it would take endless pages to describe everything I learned and experienced. It felt like it all happened in an instant. I had experienced only a small fraction of the afterlife. But it was a profound experience. As soon as I knew I had to return, I felt myself being pressed into my body. It was a violent, painful, and frightening moment. Every time I remember that moment, even now, so many years later, I cry. I couldn't believe I had decided to go back. Had I forgotten the pain, the stress, the fear, and the limitations of being human? Yes. How could I leave the peace and the love and the joy and the beauty that I came into? I knew I could step over the wall. I could have moved on. What a fool I was to come back. At the same time that I was regretting my decision, I was overcome with the fear of death inherent in my human mind. I knew I was dead. And I was terrified. Even though I had a clear memory of the afterlife, I was torn by the fears I had always felt. And I couldn't seem to process my experience well at that moment. As my roommate was getting off the top bunk, I was woken up by the intense pain from the movement of the bed. I remembered how free I was from the pain when it came up. Words began to fly out of my mouth as I tried to explain what had happened. Her first reaction was disbelief. When I told her what part of the Bible she was reading while I was sleeping on the bunk downstairs, she could not answer. She avoided further conversation, but apparently went for help. The dorm supervisor, who was in charge of our floor, came in. She wasn't a close friend, but I respected her. She listened and tried to understand. I begged her not to let me go to bed. I told her that if I had a choice again, I wouldn't go back. Eventually she left me and I fell asleep. But I wasn't given a second chance to die. I had never heard of anyone going through what I went through. I felt alone and confused. I quickly lost the desire to talk about my experience because the reaction of others was so negative and hurtful. But I began to realize that my experience had taught me a lot. When I reflected that the pain was gone and I felt an incredible peace. The fear of death that I had always had disappeared. That fear never came back. I know what awaits me. And I long to be there again. I am well aware that I came back for a reason. I don't know what my purpose is. But I know that I fully understood it before I came back. I also understand that I needed to lose that memory. One of the greatest gifts I have received from looking into the afterlife is the comfort I feel when a friend or family member dies. My grief is real, my sense of loss, but I know they are free and full of joy. Although I have rarely discussed my death, I have occasionally tried to discuss what I have learned during this experience. I am aware that I have knowledge beyond what I am able to remember. But what I have retained is crystal clear. The biggest obstacle in telling others about it is finding the words. Even now, as I write all this, I am painfully aware that I cannot even come close to describing what happened, what I felt, and what I learned. Most of all, my religious views changed. I grew up in a Christian family and made a commitment to follow Jesus when I was 10 years old. My parents were missionaries in East Africa. At times I felt distant from God or rebelled against the morals in which I had been raised. But I still considered myself a Christian. I believed that the Bible was the Word of God and that a commitment to follow Jesus Christ would save me from eternity in hell. At times I wondered about divisive religions, various theological questions or concepts about salvation. At the time of my death, I found an understanding that not only took me far beyond my former beliefs, but in many ways invalidated them. After gaining this understanding, I sometimes ignored what I had learned and clung to beliefs I had held since childhood. And sometimes I got rid of beliefs I knew to be of human rather than divine origin. It was not easy for me to process what I had learned. One result has been that I have become much more open to beliefs other than my own because I know how limited the human mind is. I know that God reveals Himself to us according to our needs and beliefs. God Himself, in the form of Jesus, struggled to give understanding to His closest devoted followers. The night before His death, His frustration is evident as He realized that they simply did not understand and His time was nearing its end. Jesus was limited by His humanity. The Holy Spirit is limited by our humanity. The Bible, though inspired by God, was written by men and read by men. It is limited by the need to use words. It is profound, but limited. It helps us understand what is beyond our understanding. God's undeserved, unconditional, priceless love is incomprehensible. The joy, peace, happiness, contentment, and love we experience in our lives are only shadows of the afterlife. The concept of salvation is our attempt to comprehend what is already ours. Our understanding of salvation, no matter how much we argue about it, does not reflect God's reality. I no longer try to search for truth because I know that in time we will all understand how truths fit together. Church, religion, is something we have done to try to understand that which is beyond understanding, to place limits on the infinite, to control that which cannot be controlled. Religion is the result of our inability to comprehend spirituality. And yet, it nourishes us, helps us grow closer to God, is our lifeline, helps us understand. It can also bring us pain, separation and confusion. I am not arguing religious beliefs. I am not trying to prove the truth of my experience. I try not to let church rules and regulations get in the way of my understanding. I simply try to relate to God as best I can. Changing my relationship to life after experiencing death took many years. And I continue to remember, reflect, and apply what I learned. At first I was alone with my experiences. I had this wonderful journey, all kinds of knowledge and understanding, but an inability to adequately express, still difficult to be heard or understood. So I tried to suppress everything. Then a sociology professor I knew as a friend told me about the Kubler-Ross book. Reading this book was a real kick in the brain, and a huge sense of relief that I was not alone. I couldn't believe the similarities between my experience and that of others. I wanted to learn more. I took a class on death and dying, figuring it would be a safe place to open up. When I was writing a paper on my near-death experience, my instructor believed that what I experienced was hallucinations caused by a drug overdose. It took many years before I had friends who knew me as an honest, reliable, and believable person, friends I could trust with my story. These friends encouraged me to talk more, to read other books about near-death experiences, and to incorporate what I learned more fully into my life. There were times when I felt so overwhelmed by the difficulties I was facing in my life that I prayed to God to let me return to Him. I prayed for death, for the opportunity to experience this miracle again. I wondered why I had the opportunity to know how beautiful life after life was. Because one of the results of that was a diminished desire to live. But I realized that knowing what unconditional love is, and experiencing such contentment, and memories of such beauty and peace meant that I had the opportunity to bring it into my experience here and now. And perhaps even help others understand, I don't have to wait to die. I have memories that can enrich my life here. So much has changed in the last 20 years since I've tasted the afterlife. And I'm not sure which changes are the result of that experience and which are simply part of growing up and becoming. I believe that although I have spent half of my life suppressing memories of my death, it has nevertheless affected me,